So hello everybody. I'm Steffini, and I'm going to be talking about defensive driving, no, defense mechanisms, yes. And this is a place that's safe for your inner child. I'm being my inner child right now. And whenever I'm in my adult body, I notice that when I'm on the road, there are people that try to get off the highway, and then they make it ahead of someone else. They get in front of someone else, and then that second person, for some reason, gets very angry and doesn't like that they were cut off as they were trying to get off on the exit. And that is an example of regression, where we go back to an earlier time and we resort to the emotions that we have back then whenever we're threatened by anxiety or pain. And that's what defense mechanisms are for, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. So, what brought me to CoDA? Well, it's going to be a little bit hard for me to talk about, but what brought me to CoDA is I found myself getting involved with people who were narcissistic. And when you do that, you kind of look up more about narcissism, and I know a lot of us in here know about it, perhaps even to the nth degree, like I do. But as I came to the realization that those were the kind of relationships I was getting into, it caused me to reflect on myself. So taking some accountability, responsibility, I started to look at myself, and there seems to be a few kinds of ways people deal with one another that causes narcissists to become attracted to you. And then going even further still, I came to realize that in my own family dynamics, I had to work pretty hard to be loved. So even though I feel lovable, loving, and loved, I had to work for it. And consequently, in my current day, then I was okay in the sense of being comfortable, but not in the sense of it feeling good, to be in the same dynamic where I'm working, I'm trying to earn it, and someone like a narcissist is very skilled at not only withholding the love, but putting something kind of fake out there to keep you working for it. So in a way, meeting that type of person has been helpful for me into understanding myself. And so when I arrived in CoDA, I was kind of fearful that that's the kind of, that there could be a person like that in the environment, in the group. But nowadays, I'm not really that afraid of them. I see them as someone who has a emotional hole in them that goes through and through, and that they try to use me as an emotional grocery store, which I complimented that because I was happy to give that. And at best, maybe I was seen as a woman instead of being a human being. Another thing, which is going to be hard for me to say, is I think, so the first law of thermodynamics states that energy is neither created nor destroyed. It can simply be transformed from one form to another, or transferred from one entity to another. And if we were to view love as a form of energy, then how would I be getting that self-love? So I went to a counselor who, as you can probably tell from how I just phrased it, who found what worked for me as a medicine was to give me unconditional love. And so the way I'm experiencing this, the way we are taught to self-love, is once you have been given unconditional love, which was supposed to come from our parents or some other dynamic in our upbringing, then I'm able to perpetuate that in myself and give it outward. That's been my experience. Now, moving along to defense mechanisms. So defense mechanisms, they are unconscious. They are an unconscious behavior, strategy even, to help the conscious you, and we'll talk about these different parts of the personality, so the id, ego, and superego can start reading up on their sheet as to help us understand the personality. But the defense mechanisms are unconscious, and they help to alleviate our pain and anxiety. They do that in the short term, and consequently, they might help us in the short term, but they might not help us in the long term. There might be some adverse consequences depending on what kind of defense mechanism you may be using. And as we go forward in this exploration of defense mechanisms, I'll talk about the personality and I'll talk about the defense mechanisms, of which there are 10. And then this would be a time where you can reflect on maybe if some of these 10 might resonate with you. And then I'll give you some things that you can do after we have had our time here that might help you explore more about yourself and defense mechanisms. So again, defense mechanisms, involuntary, unconscious, protect us from pain and anxiety in the moment. And then there's the other side of that, which is the conscious side of us, that we can develop coping mechanisms. That means it's not involuntary, it's not in our unconscious, they're in our consciousness, and they are cognitively driven for us to help ourselves, help us soothe ourselves during times of stress and anxiety. Now, you'll see next to the defense mechanisms that I will bring up here. By the way, can everybody hear me okay? Because I'm not using the microphone. Okay. You'll see next to the defense mechanism, you'll see the word immature, intermediate, or mature. And I'll be talking about 10 mechanisms. And even though it might say immature, intermediate, mature, it by no means that if you have an intermediate while someone has an immature, that somehow you're more healthy than the person with the immature. What that means from the Freudian psychoanalysis, which we'll talk about, is that is the time at which you developed and acquired that defense mechanism. So you have to be further along to do some of the defense mechanisms than you would had you just formed it in the more immature phase of your development. So again, they by no means connote your emotional health. They only tell you where in your psychological timeline where you acquired that mechanism. So I'm going to use my Austrian accent to talk to you today about Freud. That is Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud is the father of psychoanalysis. And he has divided our personality into three parts we will talk about. And we need to understand the personality, how it is formed, in order to understand why we have how actually we have the defense mechanisms. Now, as you can see here, we have some defense mechanisms which we will not discuss today. We are only talking about 10. But these are other defense mechanisms that Freud has gone over. Forgot to mention in the Freudian accent that Freud means a joy. It means a happiness. And perhaps you know that from your English word is Schadenfreude, which is the happiness at someone else's unhappiness. Okay. So this is where the id, ego, and superego, if they would be kind enough to come to the front of the room, as we talk about the three parts of the personality, as I promised you. Yeah. So id, why don't you go ahead and tell us about yourself? Yes, your line.
I want cookie now. I'm a child.
Can you eat your cookie and eat it messily?
Make a mess.
Yes, just like Cookie Monster. Don't worry, I'm cleaning it up. Woo! And thank you, Dave. And by the way, I forgot to mention in the beginning, you have some bowls of popcorn. And if you like what we're doing, if you dislike what we're doing, or you're not even sure what we're doing, you are welcome to throw it this way, and I will clean up after you. This is for your inner child to express itself. All right. Okay, you can get a cookie. You can pass this cookie.
Cookie monsters.
Okay, ego, can you speak your part?
I am the adult that negotiates between the id, superego, and the world. I am ego.
Thank you, ego. All right. They may like that. I don't know. Okay, now superego.
All right. I police the ego's negotiations with the world to achieve the ideal and the perfect. I am superego.
Thank you, superego. You may have a seat. Thank you so much for your participation. Woo! Okay. Okay, so as we have heard, three parts of our personality are the id, ego, and superego. And excuse me while I whip on out my Freudian object here. And we have, in the id, is where the primitive desires, the urges, the impulses, that is where they lie. Ego is in between the inner child and the world. And the superego is the role of the superego is to constantly monitor the ego and punish it with feelings of guilt, anxiety, and inferiority. And what you'll notice here is the Freud iceberg model. And it denotes the three parts, the id, ego, superego, and then it has this water line, above which the water line is the conscious mind, and below the water line is the unconscious. And as you will notice, the id is entirely in your unconscious. So when we talk about inner child work, it is very difficult to do the inner child work unless you are also dealing with the other parts of your personality, because they do connect. Now, the id, so the value of knowing your defense mechanisms, which by the way are unconscious and a part of your personality, and so the unconscious part of your ego, the great thing about knowing about your defense mechanisms is that they indirectly tell you about the id, because the purpose of the ego, of the defense mechanism, again, is to protect you from pain and anxiety, and that happens when the id has a little sends out a little tentacle into the ego and says, I want cookie now, I want that money now, I want that thing now. And the defense mechanism is to try to counteract that. Well, if you know the counteraction, then you can glean more into what your inner child is like. And as in the CoDA emblem, where to thine own self be true, in psychoanalysis, the true self lies at the intersection of the ego, superego, and id. Okay. So, anxiety is useful. It is what has formed your personality. And that's why we need to know the personality parts and the anxiety, because anxiety is a major driver of your personality. And anxiety occurs when the ego experiences a conflict outside of itself or inside of itself, and then it has to use the unconscious ego defense mechanism, or maybe the superego, to try to reduce that anxiety. So again, anxiety is a major driver of personality, and there are three kinds of anxiety, and this is something I learned in my preparation for this talk. Well, there's a reality-based anxiety. So that means if there is a dog in front of me that's growling and looks like it might want to bite me, that's a reality-based anxiety. If I have an unconscious fear of losing control to my inner child, to my id, drug abuse, whatever that is, that's a neurosis-based anxiety. And then lastly, there's a moral-based anxiety where I could fear my moral principles being violated. And if that happened, that would lead to shame. So these are the causes of anxiety, according to psychoanalysis. So Freud, he had a daughter, Anna Freud. And she wrote The Ego and the Mechanisms of Defense, of which there are 10. And just to restate, the defense mechanisms occur when we're trying to soothe ourselves from something that has distressed us. And the person that has a defense mechanism is totally unaware that is happening. This is only realized after the fact. And so we're about to cover her 10 defense mechanisms. Okay, so the defense mechanisms that we'll be talking about are undoing, regression, repression, isolation, projection, introjection. You might recognize some of these. Reaction formation, turning against the self, reversal, and sublimation. And so the first one, slide 11, if you can come up here because you'll be helping us with defense mechanism number 1. Thank you. So this is undoing.
Sorry, thanks.
Oh, it's okay. It's cute. Thank you. Oh.
Yeah, because we're trying to grab pictures.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're trying to get pictures of the slides.
Okay.
No, the one before. Yeah, the one before.
Oh,
Wait, go
the
on,
personality
go back.
one. Yeah, personality.
No, there was one after.
Okay, after that? Okay.
No, we were trying to write real fast. Yeah.
This one?
Yes.
Okay. Let's move forward because I don't have the room for as long as I'd like. Okay, so you're undoing, and undoing is an attempt to unconsciously compensate for a painful emotion by doing a magical behavior that will erase whatever has caused that pain or anxiety. So could you give me an example of undoing?
I'm going to give you these flowers to hopefully undo what I said yesterday about your unibrow looking like a second mustache.
Thank you. Okay, so you'll notice that it's an intermediate. Again, it has nothing to do with the emotional wellness of the person. It's the timing in your psychological development. And this can also, I've grabbed these examples just off the internet. A husband bringing flowers after an argument, or when we don't want a bad force to oppose what we just said, and we talk about touching wood. Maybe you've seen Monk. It's been a very popular detective series, and he would always touch stuff as a way to, I don't know, calm himself or something like that.
He was OCD.
He might be OCD?
No, he was.
Oh, okay, he was. Okay. Okay, so slide number 12, regression. Could you come to the front? It's the person with the Elmo. Nathan? Yes. It's good I know some of the people. This is when you revert to an earlier stage in development to handle whatever the stressor is, like the road rage. So could you talk about yourself?
I don't want to talk about my feelings. It's not fun at all.
Hey, thank you, Nathan.
Or make up my own example.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm actually regressing right now. You see how I'm dressed and everything. But so eating, meals you might have had as a child, or going back to games that you did when you were a child, or the road rage that we talked about. Okay. So repression is a really big one. And it's a big one because it is one of the defense mechanisms besides projection where you try to just wipe out the thing that is causing you to be anxious or have pain. And here we have a traumatic event or thought or feeling which we push out of our conscious into our unconscious where the inner child lives, and then it's just forgotten, like dissociative amnesia. And this happens for people. It's a very common one, but also a dangerous one, because should any of that come up, bubble up, it's very jarring and shocking to the person who has attempted to keep it down. So a childhood trauma survivor, when they're experiencing some type of anxiety, they're going to try to get this mechanism in place and shut down when in actuality they could have been dealing with the situation. Or like a person who's had a car accident and they don't want to remember any of those details, so they put it out of their conscious. Okay. Now, isolation. Okay, this is where you separate an emotion from a disturbing event. So let's say you have a disturbing event and it has emotion. Well, I can separate it. So here's the disturbing event and here's the emotion. They're separated from each other now. This is isolation. This occurs in people with obsessive compulsive personalities where they're able to separate the event from the emotion. And this also is close to the mechanism of splitting, where a person now becomes all bad or all good, and then that person has the reasons that they've done this. Another way is when a medical student is not disturbed by doing a dissection on a cadaver, where they're not thinking about what is the life of this person or what about death. They are able to put those thoughts away while they're doing something more medical. So I need slide 15 projection to come to the front. Do we have one? Okay, maybe we don't have one. Oh, you do? Okay, awesome. So could you read your example, which is when one assigns their own acceptable thoughts to another person?
My teacher sucks.
Thank you so much. May I have a seat?
Come on.
So now this is an immature mechanism. And the reason I bring this up is I think it will be easy for us to see that when there's a child and they don't have a very firm sense of who they are, they don't have a big ego, and I don't use ego in the sense of arrogance, I mean ego in the sense of their conscious self. It makes sense that you'd want to throw out into the world like, oh, I like ponies and I want to play with ponies all the time, and then the world comes back to you with, oh no, ponies are expensive, you're not allowed to ride it, you're too small, or whatever the thing is. So you can see why projection is an immature mechanism, because it's needed for normal child development to explore who they are, put it out in the world, and get the feedback. Example projection: a married person is attracted to a coworker, but accuses the coworker of flirting with them. So introjection goes along with that. I mentioned that, and that makes sense. The projection and introjection, where you incorporate other people's thoughts or words into yourself, as in blaming yourself. This happens in examples where a son internalizes the boys don't cry message from their father, and then they try to please the father with adopting other behaviors. Or where a person may internalize negative beliefs that their parent frequently used, and then that makes the person feel inadequate. It sounds like that's never happened to anybody in here. Okay, so reaction formation. Did I? 17. Can you come to the front? Yes.
I'm so happy.
Very believable. Thank you for that. Thank you. So is where we want to express the opposite of our authentic self, not really in an effort to lie per se, but to try to convince ourselves we actually feel that inauthentic emotion is the way to deal with whatever might be happening. So we might put out there something offensive or distancing when actually we like someone. Or if a person is insecure about their masculinity, they may act overly aggressive. Okay, this one is an interesting one, and it's called reversal, and it took me a while to understand what this means. And it is when you transform yourself from being the passive person, the person receiving the something, to you reverse it into being to making something else the object of what you would like to receive. And this is what is the basis for a lot of altruistic behavior. So I'll go over an example to help you understand. So if I feel that receiving care from someone is dangerous to me, what I can do is satisfy my own wanting to be cared for by caring for someone else and then getting gratification from that person receiving my care. So it's a reversal. So if one is actually dependent on others, they might try to get that person to be dependent on themselves. So it's mature. It requires a lot of thinking on how to do this.
Is that done consciously or unconsciously?
These are defense mechanisms done unconsciously. Yeah. Now, I think there's going to be coping mechanisms that could look similar and that would be part of the conscious. So I am not a therapist, so I'm not.
Can I ask you a question on that one?
Yeah.
Would that be like the victim would turn into the one that was causing the harm?
I would say yes. I don't know. Could you comment, David?
Well, one, we have different theories.
Okay.
This is Freud.
Okay, Freudian. Okay.
How many of y'all have ever heard of the drama triangle? There's a persecutor, a victim, and a rescuer. Okay. So, someone's persecuting someone, and maybe someone else steps in to try to rescue them. Okay. Or I can do that all in my own head. I think Steffini is persecuting me, I'm a victim, so then what do? To rescue myself, I attack back.
Okay.
So there's some similarities in that. But again, since I don't agree with psychoanalysis.
Okay.
But I see some, and this is a difficult one because if I'm getting care from someone but it feels dangerous, well, if it feels dangerous, is it really care? See, there's some incongruency just in that statement as far as I'm concerned.
Got it.
But then the person who's getting the care, although they don't feel safe, because it feels dangerous, is going to satisfy their dependency or their desire for care by caring for another. So maybe a person's in a relationship with someone who basically abuses them. So they might step outside, and not necessarily in a sexual way, but in a way that start caring for other people to somehow make up for what they're not getting. It's not logical, but a lot of this stuff is not logical. So,
Yes.
I don't know if that helped anybody. That's my 2 cents and one nickel more. Question?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, this is a defense mechanism called turning against the self. It sounds rather self-explanatory. You have hostility against someone else, but since you're not able to act on it, maybe it's a parent or something like that, you aim it at yourself. So a child with abusive parents thinks they deserve punishment and views abuse as discipline for their own good. So that's an example. Now so we're coming up on the last defense mechanism.
We could go back to that slide.
Oh, sure.
So, I think some people in here can probably relate to this. in that somehow we were accused, so we taught these negative beliefs, and then we continue repeating them, or like we made a mistake, and so you're a failure, we get that message. And then, when we grow up, maybe we're going to have a success, but we sabotage ourselves and create a failure. So that's turning against itself. So I just thought that makes it, for me, it makes it a little more clear to give you.
Okay. Okay.
I saw that real quick, and I got to do a double check.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
The coping mechanism is good. Turn off self-judgment.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Turn off, as if that's very easy, but turn off self-judgment, yes. And then this is the last of Anna Freud's 10 defense mechanisms. And she said in her book that the other 9 that we've just covered are, if you have them, and again, it doesn't matter immature, intermediate, mature, that it will lead to some emotional balance. And they called it neurosis back then. Neurosis will not be in the diagnostic and statistical manual. So let me give you an idea of what that means in conversation for people in the psychology world. That means anxiety, means depression, means relationship problems, means jealousy. It means those type of things. Now, when we come to this defense mechanism, this is, according to her, having this defense mechanism is not only mature but healthy, because it relies on having a connection to your super ego. And the sublimation is when you have an unacceptable impulse, but you convert it into something more useful. Like when a widow mourns her husband by creating a beautiful piece of art. Or a person who has anger issues and can convert that into some type of sport, like wrestling or running or something like that. So in this case, Anna Freud says this is a sign of a healthy person. So in summary, what we went over is what brought me to CoDA. I had some narcissistic relationships that made me reflect on myself, and I talked with my counselor, and I came to CoDA. And then we've gone over 10 of Anna Freud's defense mechanisms, and since it is CoDA World's goal to embrace the inner child, what we have done, what I'm hoping you will do as a consequence of hearing these defense mechanisms, is that you might think about, which one of these 10, if any of them, resonated with me. And if they did, perhaps you could express that, and you could do that in a journal. You could talk with a friend. You could talk with a mental health professional in an attempt to deal with that inner child work, which you're not going to just be able to have the inner child by itself. You're going to have to deal with all the other parts of the personality. And I thank you so much for